I sat in the vinyl armchair by the window of room 217, watching the same maple tree I'd been staring at for 18 months. My trembling fingers traced the plastic hospital bracelet that never seemed to come off, no matter how long I stayed. Here. My daughter Rachel had promised it would just be for a few weeks until I recovered from my stroke. That was before she sold my house, before she stopped visiting, before I realized Willow Creek Care Center wasn't a temporary stop. It was where she'd decided I would end my days. What Rachel never could have predicted was that 3 months ago, I'd hit the jackpot on a forgotten lottery ticket tucked inside my old purse. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And yesterday, I signed the papers making me the new owner of this very nursing home. The morning sunlight filtered through the industrial blinds, casting striped shadows across the linoleum floor. Outside, spring had arrived without fanfare, just like every season here at Willow Creek, where time moved differently for those of us waiting out our final chapters. The facility's intercom crackled with the usual morning announcements, punctuated by the squeaking wheels of medication carts rolling down the hallway. My room was small but neat. The staff had been kind enough to let me hang a few photographs. My late husband Edward standing proudly beside the bakery we'd built together. Rachel on her college graduation day, my arm around her shoulder, both of us beaming. My grandson, Theo's kindergarten portrait from 3 years ago. I hadn't seen him since Rachel dropped me off here and carried away the suitcase with what remained of my life. "Good morning, Mrs. Fitzgerald," Nurse McKenna said, knocking gently as she entered. With my morning medications. Her smile was genuine, her eyes kind, unlike some of the other staff who saw us residents as little more than tasks to complete on their shifts. "How are we feeling today?" "Just fine, McKenna," I replied, reaching for the paper cup of pills. At 78, I'd learned that fine was the easiest answer, regardless of the truth. The stroke had left my left side weakened, my speech occasionally slurred when I was tired, but my mind remained sharp as ever, a fact Rachel seemed determined to ignore. "Did you sleep well last night?" she asked, checking my vitals with practiced efficiency. "About the same," I said, swallowing the bitter pills. Sleep came in fragments here, interrupted by hall lights, nighttime check-ins, and the moaning of my roommate Judith, whose dementia had her calling out for her children most nights. McKenna made a note on her tablet. "Dr. Winters will be stopping by later. Your daughter called yesterday. She wanted an update on your condition." "Did she now?" I tried to keep the bitterness from my voice. Rachel hadn't visited in over 3 months, not even for Christmas. Her calls to the nursing home staff had become her substitute for actual interaction. "Did she mention anything about visiting?" Her hesitation told me everything. "She said she's very busy with the new house. The remodel is taking longer than expected." The new house. My house. Or rather, what it had become after Rachel convinced me to sign over power of attorney during my hospital stay. The Victorian I'd shared with Edward for 45 years, where we'd raised our children, hosted countless Sunday dinners, and created a lifetime of memories, had been sold within weeks of my transfer to Willow Creek. Rachel had assured me it was for the best, that maintaining the property was too much responsibility in my condition. "Of course," I nodded. "The remodel." After McKenna left, I pulled myself to my feet with my cane and shuffled to the small dresser. From the bottom drawer, beneath folded cardigans I rarely wore, I retrieved the faded blue envelope. Inside was the winning lottery ticket, now officially verified but still kept secret from everyone but my lawyer, Margaret Chen. Next to it was a set of papers, the preliminary purchase agreement for Willow Creek Care Center, which Margaret had been negotiating through a blind trust. 18 months of watching the clock, being told when to eat, when to sleep, when to take my medications, 18 months of hoping Rachel would change her mind, would realize that with some in-home help, I could have managed in my own house. 18 months of seeing the other residents here, some with no family at all, others whose children visited, dutifully each Sunday for exactly 1 hour, their relief palpable when it was time to leave. I wasn't angry anymore. That had passed somewhere around month 6. Now I felt something different, a calm determination that had solidified with each passing day. The $14.7 million jackpot, reduced to $8.2 million after taxes, had given me options I never imagined having again. When Margaret had asked what I wanted to do with the money, my answer surprised even me. "I want to buy Willow Creek," I told her, "and then I want to change everything about it." The care center was part of a struggling chain, its parent company eager to offload underperforming facilities. Margaret had worked quietly, carefully, to keep my identity hidden during negotiations. I eased myself back into the chair by the window, watching as a group of residents were wheeled out to the concrete patio for their morning fresh air, 15 minutes of sitting in a circle under supervision before being returned indoors. That would be one of the first things to change. My fee. Fingers found the small notebook hidden beneath my chair cushion. Inside, I'd been keeping a list for months, long before the lottery win, of all the ways Willow Creek could be improved. Not complaints, but observations. How the understaffed nurses struggled to provide proper care. How the bland, institutional food went uneaten. How the recreational activities consisted mainly of daytime television and occasional bingo. How the building itself, with its narrow hallways and fluorescent lighting, felt more like a place for storage than living. The facility administrator, Mr. Reynolds, had no idea that in 3 days, at the monthly staff meeting, his new boss would be revealed. The man who'd repeatedly dismissed my suggestions, who'd told me to be grateful for the care I received, who treated residents' family complaints as annoyances rather than valid concerns. I smiled, watching a robin land on the maple branch outside my window. Sometimes life gives you unexpected second chances. This was mine, not just to improve my own situation, but to transform Willow Creek into what it should have been all along, a place of dignity, comfort, and genuine care. Rachel would find out eventually, of course. I pictured her face when she realized that the mother she'd discarded had become the owner of the very facility where she'd left me to be forgotten. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my agency, my purpose. It was about making meaning from the time I had left. I didn't always live in room 217. Before Willow Creek, before the stroke, there was a life I'd built through decades of loving effort, a life Rachel seemed to have forgotten entirely. My fingers traced the worn edge of Edward's photograph, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners, just as they had the day we opened our bakery, Fitzgerald's, back in 1972. He'd been gone 7 years now, but sometimes when I closed my eyes, I could still smell the cinnamon and butter that clung to his clothes no matter how many times they were washed. "You're the heart of this place, Eleanor," he used to tell me every morning as we kneaded dough side by side. And for 40 years, I was. While Edward handled the books and charmed the customers, I created the recipes that made Fitzgerald's a neighborhood institution. Our signature maple pecan rolls drew people from 3 counties over. When Edward passed, a heart attack, sudden and cruel, I kept the bakery running for another 3 years before arthritis in my hands forced me to sell. The bakery money, combined with Edward's life insurance and our savings, had left me comfortable. Not wealthy, but secure in the Victorian home we'd restored together, the one with the wraparound porch where I'd read stories to Rachel and her brother Michael when they were small. The house where, later, I'd taught my grandson Theo to make his first cookie dough, his small hands covered in flour as he giggled. Michael lived in Arizona now. He called every Sunday without fail, but distance and his wife's health issues kept him from visiting often. Rachel, though, Rachel and her family lived just 20 minutes away. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before the stroke, she'd drop Theo off for an afternoon now and then, usually when she needed a free babysitter. I never minded. Those days with Theo were precious, making cookies or working in the garden or reading the adventure books that lined my shelves. "Grandma, tell about the time you and Grandpa took the train all the way across the country," he'd beg, his eyes wide with wonder. And I would, embellishing a little more each time, until our real-life 3-week trip became an epic journey of magical proportions. Outside my nursing home window, a young mother pushed a stroller along the sidewalk, pausing to point out a squirrel to her toddler. My chest tightened. I couldn't remember the last time Rachel had brought Theo to visit. It was ironic, really. I'd given Rachel everything: love, support, the down payment for her first house, endless hours of childcare. She'd been a challenging teenager, rebellious and sharp-tongued, but I'd always attributed it to her grief after Edward died during her senior year of high school. I thought we'd moved past that difficult phase. Now I wondered if resentment had been simmering beneath the surface all along. The stroke happened on a Tuesday. I was in the garden, pruning roses, when the world tilted sideways. I remember the smell of earth, the thorns pricking my fingers. Then nothing until I woke in the hospital 3 days later with Rachel sitting beside my bed, her face drawn with what I thought was concern. "You can't live alone anymore, Mom," she'd said firmly. "It's not safe." Looking back, I should have noticed how quickly she jumped to power of attorney, how eagerly she suggested temporary rehabilitation at Willow Creek. At the time, weakened and disoriented, I'd agreed to everything. The doctors said I needed intensive therapy but could make a substantial recovery. I believed them. I believed Rachel. 6 weeks of physical therapy turned into 2 months, then 3. Each time I mentioned going home, Rachel had a new reason why I couldn't. The house had steps. The bathroom wasn't accessible. I couldn't manage my medications. When I suggested a home health aide, she dismissed it as too expensive, too complicated. Then came the day Rachel arrived with papers. The house had been on the market for weeks without my knowledge. She'd already cleared out most of my belongings. Donated or put in storage, she said vaguely. The Victorian that held every memory of my life with Edward had been sold to a young couple who planned to modernize it. My garden would be paved for a larger driveway. "It's done, Mom," she said, sliding the final paperwork across the small table in Willow Creek's visitors' lounge. "The money is in your account. Well, the account I manage for you. It's for the best." I signed the papers with a hand that shook from more than just the lingering effects of the stroke. What choice did I have? My home was already gone. That night, after the nurses finished their rounds, I cried for the first time since Edward died. Not delicate tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that left me gasping. My roommate at the time, a sweet woman named Harriet who has since passed, reached across the narrow space between our beds and took my hand. "They think they know what's best for us," she whispered. "They forget we've lived whole lives before they came along." After that night, something shifted in me. If this was to be my new reality, I would face it with the same determination that had carried me through widowhood, through raising children, through building a business from scratch. I began to observe Willow Creek with new eyes, noting every deficiency, every moment of carelessness, every missed opportunity for kindness. I made friends among the residents. Dorothy, a retired English teacher with a wicked sense of humor. Walter, who had been a civil engineer and still carried pocket protectors in his cardigan. Sophia, once a concert pianist, whose gnarled fingers could still coax beautiful melodies from the out-of-tune piano in the recreation room. We formed an unofficial council, sharing our observations, finding small ways to improve our days. Rachel's visits grew less frequent. First weekly, then monthly, then only on major holidays. Each time she came, she spent more time talking to the nurses about my condition than actually speaking to me. Theo would perch uncomfortably on the edge of a chair, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the hospital beds, the smell of disinfectant, the moans from down the hall. "He's busy with soccer now," Rachel explained when she started coming alone. "He has games most weekends." I understood. What child would want to visit this place? But it stung nonetheless. The lottery ticket had been a gift from Mrs. Chen, not yet my lawyer then, just the kind daughter of another resident who often stopped by my room after visiting her father. She'd won a book of tickets at her office Christmas party and shared them among her friends at Willow Creek. "For good luck in the new year, Mrs. Fitzgerald," she'd said with a smile. I tucked the ticket into my purse and promptly forgot about it until Mrs. Chen herself burst into my room 3 months ago, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mrs. Fitzgerald," she whispered, "did you check your ticket? The winning numbers, they match yours." Life has a way of surprising you just when you've given up on surprises. In that moment, as Mrs. Chen and I stared at each other in disbelief, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 18 months. Hope. Not just hope, but possibility. Power. The chance to rewrite an ending that had been thrust upon me. And now, here I sat, the secret owner of Willow Creek Care Center, with plans that would soon change everything, not just for me, but for every resident who, like me, deserved so much better than they had received. The morning of the staff meeting dawned, with unusual clarity. Outside my window, the maple tree's leaves shimmered in the early light, each one distinct and vibrant against the blue sky. I'd slept poorly, anticipation keeping me awake long into the night, but I felt more alert than I had in months. Today, everything would change. I dressed with care, choosing my best outfit, a cornflower blue blouse that Edward always said matched my eyes, and navy slacks that the physical therapist had helped me learn to manage despite my weakened left side. I pinned my silver hair up in a neat twist instead of my usual practical braid. Today wasn't about being practical. It was about reclaiming dignity. "My, don't you look lovely," Nurse McKenna said when she came with my morning medications. "Is your daughter visiting today?" "No," I replied, accepting the paper cup of pills. "Just felt like making an effort." She smiled warmly. "Well, it suits you. You remind me of my grandmother. She always said dressing well was a form of good manners." I returned her smile, thinking how different Willow Creek would be once staff. Like McKenna, the ones who saw us as people, not just patients, were properly valued and supported. She was one of the few who would be pleased by the coming changes. Mrs. Chen arrived at 10:30, precisely as planned. She looked every inch the successful attorney in her tailored suit, carrying a leather portfolio and the confident air of someone accustomed to closing deals. "Are you ready, Mrs. Fitzgerald?" she asked after we exchanged greetings. "As I'll ever be," I replied, reaching for my cane. "Let's not keep Mr. Reynolds waiting." The administrator's office was on the first floor, at the end of a corridor decorated with bland watercolor prints and motivational phrases that no one ever stopped to read. Mr. Reynolds had agreed to meet with Mrs. Chen, believing she represented a wealthy client interested in making a donation to Willow Creek. He had no idea I would be attending. His secretary's eyes widened when she saw me accompanying Mrs. Chen. "Mrs. Fitzgerald? Mr. Reynolds is expecting both of us," Mrs. Chen finished smoothly. "Shall we go in?" Mr. Reynolds stood when we entered, his smile faltering slightly when he saw me. He was a tall man with thinning hair and a perpetual look of mild irritation, as though the residents and their needs were constant inconveniences. "Ms. Chen, welcome," he said, extending his hand before turning to me with visible confusion. "Mrs. Fitzgerald? I wasn't aware you'd be joining us." "That's rather the point, Daniel," I said, using his first name deliberately as I lowered myself into one of the chairs opposite his desk. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." Mrs. Chen placed her portfolio on the desk and extracted several documents. Mr. Reynolds, I'm here today not as a representative of a potential donor, but as legal counsel for Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald, who as of yesterday morning is the new owner of Willow Creek Care Center. The color drained from his face. That's impossible. The facility was purchased by Monarch Senior Living Trust. Yes, Mrs. Chen replied calmly. A trust established by and for the benefit of Mrs. Fitzgerald. Reynolds stared at me, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and the dawning realization that the resident he'd so often dismissed was now, effectively, his employer. There must be some mistake, he said, his voice strained. The corporate paperwork, the negotiations, were conducted through proper channels with full legal oversight, Mrs. Chen finished. The previous ownership group has been paid in full, all regulatory requirements have been met, and the transfer of ownership is complete. Here are copies of the relevant documentation. She slid a folder across the desk. Reynolds didn't touch it. How? He finally managed, looking directly at me. How could you possibly purchase a multi-million-dollar care facility? I completed his thought. I came into a substantial windfall recently, and after 18 months as a resident here, I developed some rather strong opinions about how Willow Creek should be run. The intercom on his desk buzzed. Mr. Reynolds, his secretary's voice announced, the staff meeting is set to begin in 5 minutes. Everyone's gathered in the conference room. Perfect timing, I said. Shall we? Mrs. Chen helped me to my feet. Reynolds remained frozen behind his desk. Daniel, I said gently, you can either join us at the meeting where we'll announce the change in ownership and new direction for Willow Creek, or you can begin clearing out your office. The choice is yours. His jaw clenched, but he stood and led the way to the conference room. The room fell silent as we entered. Around the table sat the department heads, nursing, dietary, maintenance, activities, and social services, along with a few corporate representatives who had no idea their positions had just become obsolete. In the back row sat several direct care staff, including McKenna, who gave me a puzzled smile. Good morning, Reynolds began, his voice tight. We have an unexpected announcement today. I'll let Mrs. Chen explain. Mrs. Chen stepped forward. Good morning. I'm Margaret Chen, attorney for Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald. She gestured to where I stood beside her. As of yesterday, Mrs. Fitzgerald is the new owner of Willow Creek Care Center. The room erupted in murmurs and confused glances. I leaned on my cane, waiting for the initial shock to subside. Mrs. Fitzgerald would like to address you all, Mrs. Chen continued when the noise died down. I moved to the front of the room, my heart pounding but my voice steady. For those who don't know me, I've been a resident here for 18 months, in room 217. During that time, I've experienced firsthand the care this facility provides, both its strengths and its significant shortcomings. I paused, looking around the room. Some faces showed concern, others curiosity. A few, like McKenna's, reflected dawning hope. Willow Creek will be undergoing substantial changes, effective immediately. First, every direct care staff member will receive a 20% raise. This brought gasps from the back of the room. The facility will be hiring additional nurses, aides, and support staff to ensure proper coverage on all shifts. No more 16-hour doubles, no more caring for 15 residents at once. The corporate representatives exchanged alarmed glances. One began to speak, but Mrs. Chen silenced him with a raised hand. Second, I continued, the dietary department will be completely overhauled. Food will be fresh, nutritious, and actually appetizing. Residents will have genuine choices, not just take it or leave it options. I went through my list methodically. The improvements I'd been planning for months. More activities beyond bingo and television. Renovations to create private rooms with actual privacy. Gardens where residents could get real sunshine. Transportation for regular outings. a therapy dog program, end-of-life care that focused on comfort and dignity. These changes will require significant investment, I acknowledged, which I am prepared to make. Willow Creek will transition from a for-profit model to a non-profit foundation. Any excess revenue will be reinvested in facility improvements and staff development. I turned to face the administrative staff directly. Some leadership positions will be restructured. Those of you who share my vision for resident-centered care are welcome to be part of this transformation. Those who don't should arrange meetings with Mrs. Chen to discuss severance packages. My gaze rested finally on Reynolds, whose face had settled into a mask of rigid professionalism. Mr. Reynolds, I believe we'll start with your position as... The meeting concluded. McKenna approached me, tears in her eyes. Mrs. Fitzgerald, I can't believe this. Is it really happening? I reached out and squeezed her hand. It is, my dear, and I'm counting on good people like you to help make it work. As Mrs. Chen led me back to my room, residents and staff alike stopped to stare, word of the ownership change already racing through the facility. For the first time since arriving at Willow Creek, I walked the halls not as a patient to be managed, but as a woman with purpose and power. By evening, my quiet revolution had begun. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Room 217, which had been my prison and refuge for 18 months, now felt like a temporary way station as Willow Creek transformed around me. Mrs. Chen had arranged for a modest office to be set up in what had previously been a rarely used storage room near the main lobby. The space was small but bright, with a window overlooking the front gardens where workers were already installing wheelchair-accessible paths and raised planting beds. A nameplate on the door read, Eleanor Fitzgerald, Founder and Director. Founder? I had questioned when Mrs. Chen presented me with the title. You are founding something new, she replied simply. The previous Willow Creek is gone. My first morning in the office felt strange, liberating and terrifying in equal measure. I had traded the predictable routine of room 217 for a schedule, filled with meetings, decisions, and responsibilities I hadn't shouldered in years. My hands trembled slightly as I reviewed architectural plans for the renovation, the names of contractors blurring before my eyes. Am I being foolish? I asked Mrs. Chen during a quiet moment. Taking on this much at my age, after everything? She considered the question carefully before answering. My father always told me that age is not what limits us. It's the stories. We tell ourselves about what's possible. You've simply changed your story, Mrs. Fitzgerald. I nodded, thinking of all the stories I'd been told since my stroke. That I was too frail to live independently, too confused to manage my finances, too burdensome to remain in my own home. I had almost believed them. Well, I said, straightening the papers on my desk, let's make this a story worth telling. We began with the staff. Reynolds had departed with a generous but non-negotiable severance package, along with several administrators who couldn't adapt to our new philosophy. In their places, we promoted from within. McKenna became our director of nursing, and Walter, the retired engineer I'd befriended, agreed to oversee the renovation plans, his expertise proving invaluable. You've given me purpose again, Ellie, he told me one afternoon as we reviewed blueprints. Haven't felt this useful in years. The most significant change came in how we referred to the people who lived at Willow Creek. No longer patients or residents, but community members. It was a small linguistic shift that represented a fundamental reorientation of our mission. By the end of the first month, we had hired 8 additional nurses, 12 aides, a full-time physical therapist, and a nutritionist who had previously worked at a high-end retirement community in California. The food improved virtually overnight. Real eggs instead of powdered fresh vegetables, bread baked daily in our newly upgraded kitchen. Mrs. Fitzgerald, Judith, my former roommate, called out one day as I passed the dining room. The muffins today, they taste like real muffins. Her eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in months. the fog of her dementia temporarily lifted by the simple pleasure of food that actually had flavor. Not every change was simple. The physical renovations would take months. The regulatory hurdles were endless. Some family members were skeptical, worried we were raising rates. We weren't. Or changing too much too quickly. We probably were. But with each week, the atmosphere at Willow Creek shifted perceptibly from institutional resignation to cautious optimism. Throughout it all, Rachel remained conspicuously absent. I had instructed the front desk staff not to mention the ownership, change if she called, and apparently, she never asked enough questions to discover it on her own. Her check-ins had dwindled to brief monthly calls, always to the nursing staff, never directly to me. I told myself I wasn't keeping secrets, I was waiting for the right moment. But in truth, a part of me savored the knowledge that when Rachel finally did visit, she would find not the docile mother she had discarded, but a woman who had reclaimed her power. That moment came sooner than I expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 6 weeks after I had purchased Willow Creek. I was in the newly created garden courtyard, helping Dorothy plant marigolds in a raised bed, when Makina approached with an unusual expression, part concern, part suppressed amusement. "Mrs. Fitzgerald," she said quietly, "your daughter is here. She's waiting in your office." My heart skipped. "Did you tell her—" "No," Makina replied. She saw the construction and asked what was happening. "I just said you could explain everything." I brushed the soil from my hands, suddenly conscious of my gardening apron and casual clothes. Not the impression I had planned for this reunion, but perhaps more authentic. "Would you like me to come with you?" Makina offered. I shook my head. This is a conversation long overdue. Rachel was standing by the window when I entered, her back to the door, arms crossed tightly across her chest. She turned at the sound of my cane on the floor, her expression a mixture of confusion and irritation. "Mom? What's going on here? They said this is your office? And why is everything under construction?" I closed the door behind me and moved to sit behind the desk, gesturing for her to take the chair opposite. "Hello, Rachel. It's been, 4 months since your last visit?" She remained standing. "I've been busy. The house, Theo's school." She waved a hand dismissively. "That's not important right now. What's happening here?" "The nurse wouldn't tell me anything, just sent me to this office. And there's your name, on the door." "Please sit," I said calmly. When she reluctantly complied, I continued. "Willow Creek is under new ownership, my ownership to be precise." Her eyes widened. "That's not possible." And yet, it's true. I took a breath, steadying myself. "I won the lottery, Rachel. Quite a substantial amount." She stared at me in disbelief. "The lottery? When? How much? Why didn't you tell me?" "Why would I?" I asked simply. "You made it very clear that my financial affairs were no longer my concern. When you took power of attorney, you sold my home, my possessions, all without consulting me. You decided where I would live, who would care for me, when or if I would see my grandson." Her face flushed. "That was for your own good. You had a stroke. The doctors said I needed temporary rehabilitation," I interrupted. "They never recommended permanent placement here. That was your decision." Rachel's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. "As for the lottery," I continued, "it happened 3 months ago. I used the money to purchase this facility because I saw firsthand how it could and should be improved." Her expression shifted, a calculating look crossing her face. "How much did you win exactly?" Of course, that would be her first real question, not how I was feeling, not what changes I was making, but how much money was involved. "Enough," I said simply. "Enough to buy Willow Creek. Enough to transform it into a place where people can age with dignity, and enough to ensure I will never again be at the mercy of someone else's convenience." Rachel leaned forward. "Mom, be reasonable. You can't manage." Something like this. You're not what, Rachel? Not capable? Not competent? I fixed her with a steady gaze. I ran a successful business for decades. I raised 2 children. I survived losing your father. What exactly do you think I cannot manage? She fell silent, perhaps truly seeing me for the first time since my stroke, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person with agency and determination. I came today because... She hesitated. Theo's been asking about you. He wants to visit. My heart softened at the mention of my grandson, but I kept my expression neutral. He's always welcome here. This is still my home, at least until the renovations on my new apartment are complete. New apartment? Rachel echoed. Yes. I'm having the old administrative wing converted into a private residence. I'll be overseeing Willow Creek while living independently again, something you insisted was impossible. Rachel stood abruptly. I need time to process this. Take all the time you need, I said, rising more slowly. I've had 18 months to think about what happened, about the choices you made for me rather than with me. When you're ready to talk, really talk, I'll be here. As she reached the door, I added softly, and Rachel, please tell Theo his grandmother misses him very much. After she left, I remained at my desk, expecting to feel triumph or vindication. Instead, I felt a complicated mixture of sadness and hope. The confrontation I had anticipated for weeks had come and gone, leaving behind not closure but an opening, a chance perhaps to rebuild on more honest terms. Outside my window, in the East garden court, Dorothy was still planting marigolds, her gnarled hands pressing each seedling carefully into the soil. Life beginning again, I thought, even when it seems too late. The euphoria of those first transformative weeks couldn't last forever. Reality arrived in the form of an urgent call from Mrs. Chen on a rainy Thursday morning. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Rachel has filed for guardianship review. My blood ran cold. What does that mean exactly? She's challenging your competency, Mrs. Chen explained, claiming the stroke affected your judgment more than previously documented. She's requesting a court-appointed guardian to oversee your financial decisions. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months, Rachel had barely acknowledged my existence, and now suddenly she was deeply concerned about my welfare, or rather, my wealth. She can't possibly succeed, I said, though uncertainty crept into my voice. It's not a simple matter to have someone declared incompetent, Mrs. Chen replied carefully. But these cases can become complicated, especially with family involvement. We need to take this seriously. I hung up the phone and stared out at the rain streaming down my office window. The construction workers were huddled under a temporary shelter, their progress for the day halted. It felt symbolic somehow. Later that afternoon, Walter knocked on my door. His face was drawn with concern. Heard? About Rachel's legal nonsense, he said, settling into the chair across from me. Word traveled quickly at Willow Creek, especially now that staff and residents actually talk to each other. She won't get away with it. I hope not, I sighed. But it's more complicated than just winning or losing the case. Walter nodded, understanding. Because she's your daughter. Yes. I twisted the simple gold band I still wore on my left hand. Edward would be so disappointed. Not just in her actions now, but in how I've let our relationship deteriorate. That's a two-way street, Ellie, Walter said gently. You can't maintain a relationship alone. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, Mrs. Chen helped me prepare, gathering medical evaluations from new doctors, testimonials from staff who worked with me daily, and documentation of all the improvements at Willow Creek since I'd taken ownership. The judge will. See, this isn't the action of someone with impaired judgment, Mrs. Chen assured me. These changes are thoughtful, fiscally responsible, and beneficial to everyone involved. I wanted to believe her, But doubt gnawed at me. What if Rachel succeeded? What if everything I'd started fell apart? The residents who had begun to hope, the staff who had finally received fair compensation, what would happen to them? 2 days. Before the hearing, McKenna came to my office, her expression troubled. "Mrs. Fitzgerald, there's something you should know," she said hesitantly. "Your daughter was here yesterday while you were at your doctor's appointment." My stomach tightened. What did she want? She was asking questions about your daily routine, whether you ever seem confused, if you take all your medications. McKenna's voice hardened. She was fishing for evidence. "And what did you tell her?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. McKenna's loyalty was unquestionable, the truth. That you're the most clear-headed person in this building, staff included. I smiled despite the heaviness in my chest. "Thank you, McKenna." "There's more," she added reluctantly. She brought Theo with her. The pain of that revelation was sharper than I expected. My own grandson, here in the building, and Rachel hadn't even allowed him to see me. "He was asking about you," McKenna continued. "He saw your name on the office door. Rachel told him you were playing pretend because of your condition." I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing the cruelty of it. When I opened them, my resolve had hardened. "Mrs. Chen says we need character witnesses for the hearing," I said. "Would you be willing to testify?" "Absolutely," McKenna replied without hesitation. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, wood-paneled and austere. I sat with Mrs. Chen on one side, Rachel and her attorney on the other. We didn't speak or make eye contact. The formal distance between us felt both painful and appropriate. Judge Keating, a woman perhaps a decade younger than myself with silver-streaked dark hair, reviewed the documents before addressing the court. "This is a competency evaluation for Eleanor Fitzgerald regarding a petition filed by her daughter, Rachel Morales," she began. "Before we hear arguments, I'd like to speak with Mrs. Fitzgerald directly." I rose carefully, using my cane more for reassurance than necessity, and approached the bench. "Mrs. Fitzgerald," the judge said, her tone respectful rather than condescending, "your daughter has expressed concern about decisions you've made following a significant medical event. Would you care to address those concerns?" I looked directly at her, then briefly at Rachel, whose expression remained impassive. "Your Honor, 18 months ago I had a stroke. It affected my physical abilities, which I've worked hard to rehabilitate. It did not affect my mind or my judgment." I paused, gathering my thoughts. What did affect my judgment, temporarily, was grief. Grief for the independence I feared I'd lost forever. Grief for the home that was sold without my meaningful consent. Grief for the relationship with my daughter that had become one of caretaker and charge rather than parent and child. The judge listened intently as I continued. "I've been fortunate enough to reclaim my independence through unexpected means. The changes I've implemented at Willow Creek Care Center aren't impulsive or irrational. They're the result of 18 months of careful observation as someone living within an imperfect system. I believe my actions demonstrate not confusion, but clarity of purpose." Judge Keating nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mrs. Fitzgerald. You may be seated." As the hearing proceeded, I watched Rachel's face as McKenna, Walter, and even Dorothy testified to my competence and the positive impact of my leadership. With each witness, her expression grew more strained, the reality of her situation perhaps finally dawning on her. She wasn't fighting an incompetent elderly woman. She was opposing her mother, still very much herself, surrounded by people who actually knew and valued her. Petition denied. Judge Keating's words brought the gavel down with finality, but the victory felt hollow. I had won the legal battle, proven my competence beyond question, and preserved my right to manage my own affairs. Yet as I watched Rachel gather her belongings and leave the courtroom without even a glance in my direction, I knew the more important conflict remained unresolved. Mrs. Chen squeezed my hand. "This is good news, Mrs. Fitzgerald. The judge was quite clear. No further petitions of this nature can be filed without substantial new evidence." "Yes," I said, still watching the door through which Rachel had disappeared. "I suppose that's that." But it wasn't, not really. Despite the court's decision, Rachel's attempt to regain control over my life had taken its toll. I was physically and emotionally drained, the stress of the proceedings having exacerbated the lingering weakness from my stroke. More painful was the knowledge that my own daughter had been willing to have me declared incompetent simply to access my unexpected fortune. "You need rest," Mrs. Chen said as we drove back to Willow Creek. "The renovations, the staffing changes, they can continue without your daily oversight for a while." I nodded, too tired to argue. The truth was, I had been pushing myself too hard, determined to prove I could manage both my health and my newfound responsibilities. Perhaps it was time to acknowledge my limitations, not out of defeat, but wisdom. For the next week, I reduced my hours in the office, delegating more decisions to the capable team we'd assembled. Makina oversaw the day-to-day operations, Walter continued to monitor the construction progress, and a new activities director, an energetic woman named Pauline who had previously worked in arts education, brought fresh ideas for engaging programs. Spent more time in the garden, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing growing things. The raised beds were flourishing with late summer flowers and vegetables, tended by residents who, like me, found purpose in caring for something beyond themselves. Dorothy joined me one warm afternoon, her wheelchair positioned carefully beside the bench where I sat deadheading marigolds. "You've been quiet since the court business," she observed in her direct way. "Thinking about your daughter?" I nodded. "I can't help wondering where I went wrong, how we became so disconnected." Dorothy snorted. "Sometimes it's not about what you did wrong. Some people just can't see past their own needs, even when it's family." "She wasn't always like this," I said softly. "After Edward died, something changed. She became more controlling, as if she didn't trust me to manage on my own. Or maybe she didn't trust herself," Dorothy suggested. "Seeing you alone scared her, reminded her of her own vulnerability. Some people respond to fear by trying to control everything around them." I considered this, seeing Rachel through a different lens. Her father's death when she was just 18 had shaped her in ways I perhaps hadn't fully appreciated. Her need for security, for predictability, might explain her desperate grasp for control now. Understanding didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me see a potential path forward. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since before my stroke. I baked. The kitchen staff had gone home for the day, leaving the newly renovated space quiet and available. I moved slowly but deliberately, measuring flour, creaming butter and sugar, my left hand cooperating better than it had in months. By midnight, I had produced 3 dozen maple pecan rolls, not quite the perfection of my bakery days, but recognizable, descendants of the recipe that had once been our signature. The next morning, I packaged a dozen of the rolls in a box, adding a handwritten note. I asked Walter to deliver them to Rachel's house. "You sure about this?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "After what she tried to pull." "I'm sure," I replied. "This isn't about forgiveness yet. It's about remembering who we were before everything went wrong." The note was simple. "These were your father's favorite. Theo might enjoy them." Mom days. Passed with no response. I hadn't really expected one, but still, each morning I checked my phone with a small flutter of hope. The work at Willow Creek continued, new furniture arriving for the common areas, the first set of resident rooms completed with private bathrooms and actual decor instead of institutional blandness. 10 days after sending the maple rolls, McKenna knocked on my apartment door. The renovation of my private quarters had been completed the previous week, giving me a comfortable one-bedroom space with a small sitting area and kitchenette, a significant upgrade from room 217. "You have visitors," she said with an unreadable expression. My heart raced. "Rachel?" "And Theo," McKenna confirmed. "They're waiting in the garden court." I smoothed my hair, suddenly conscious of my casual clothes and lack of preparation. "I'll be right there." The garden was at its peak, late summer blooms creating a riot of color along the wheelchair-accessible paths. Rachel sat stiffly on a bench near the central fountain, while Theo explored the raised beds, poking curiously at the cherry tomatoes. At 10, he was taller than when I'd last seen him, his dark hair longer, his face losing some of its childish roundness. My chest tightened at the realization of how much I'd missed. He spotted me first. "Grandma!" he called, straightening up with a hesitant smile. Rachel turned, her expression guarded. She stood as I approached but didn't move toward me. "Hello, Theo," I said warmly, opening my arms. After a quick glance at his mother, he stepped into my embrace. He was all angles and energy, but he hugged me tightly. "Mom said you're in charge of this place now," he said when we separated, his eyes wide. "Is that true?" "It is," I replied, gesturing for both of them to sit. "Would you like a tour?" Theo nodded eagerly. Rachel's agreement was more reluctant, but she didn't refuse. As we walked through the renovated spaces, the bright dining room with cafe-style seating instead of institutional tables, the new library with comfortable chairs and well-stocked shelves, the music room where Sophia was teaching another resident to play a simple tune on the recently tuned piano, I watched Rachel's face carefully. Surprise gave way to reluctant admiration, then thoughtfulness. She said little, but her eyes took in everything. I couldn't tell if she was impressed by the changes or simply calculating their cost. "And this is my apartment," I said finally, opening the door to my new living space. "My home now." Theo explored, with the uninhibited curiosity of childhood, exclaiming over the small balcony with its flower boxes and the framed photographs I'd managed to recover or replace, including several of Rachel as a child. Rachel stood in the center of the room, looking lost. "It's nice," she said finally. "Better than I expected." It wasn't much, but it was something. A tiny crack in the wall between us. "The maple rolls were good," Theo volunteered. "Mom said you used to make them at your bakery." "I did," I smiled. "Your grandfather claimed they were famous in 3 counties." "Could you show me how to make them sometime?" he asked, glancing at his mother as if seeking permission. Before Rachel could respond, I said, "I'd like that very much. Whenever your mother thinks it's a good time." Rachel met my eyes directly for the first time. Maybe next weekend." A beginning, small, uncertain, but real. Theo's visit, tentative as it was, opened a door that had seemed permanently closed. The following weekend, he returned as promised, and we spent 3 hours in Willow Creek's kitchen, flour dusting our clothes as I taught him the secrets of my maple pecan rolls. "The trick is patience," I told him, demonstrating how to knead the dough. "You can't rush good things." Rachel watched from the doorway, neither participating nor interfering. Her presence was stiff, her conversation minimal, but she was there, a silent acknowledgement that something was shifting between us. These cautious visits continued for several weeks. Theo would come, sometimes with a school project to show me, sometimes just to help in the garden or play checkers with Walter, who had become something of a surrogate grandfather figure. Rachel remained on the periphery, civil but distant. I didn't push. The maple rolls, the gentle reintroduction of shared time. These were my offerings. The rest would have to come from her, if it came at all. Meanwhile, Willow Creek's transformation progressed steadily. The physical renovations were nearly complete. Bright, private rooms, accessible bathrooms with actual dignity-preserving features, common areas designed for genuine community rather than warehousing. More significant were the cultural changes. Staff who had time to truly care for residents. Meals shared at real tables with conversation and laughter. Activities that engaged minds and bodies with purpose. Word began to spread. Families with loved ones in other facilities started requesting tours. Healthcare professionals came to observe our model. Local news featured a story on our revolutionary approach to elder care, though what seemed revolutionary to them felt simply humane to me. Through it all, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop with Rachel. Despite her surface cooperation, I sensed she hadn't fully accepted the new reality. The tension between us remained, unacknowledged but palpable. The moment of truth arrived on a crisp October afternoon. I was reviewing financial reports with Mrs. Chen when Makina knocked urgently on my office door. "Mrs. Fitzgerald, you need to come quickly," she said, her expression troubled. "Your daughter is in the main lobby and she's upset." I found Rachel pacing near the reception desk, her face flushed with anger. When she saw me, she stopped abruptly. "How could you?" she demanded without preamble. "Rachel," I said carefully, "why don't we talk in my office?" "No," she snapped. "Right here is fine. I want to know why you did it." I was genuinely confused. Did what, exactly? The trust fund for Theo. She thrust a document toward me. "I found the paperwork when I was going through some mail. You set up a college fund for him without even discussing it with me." "Ah, that explained it." Yes, I had established an educational trust for Theo, with the funds accessible only for college expenses when he turned 18. Mrs. Chen had handled the details weeks ago, sending the necessary documentation to Rachel's address. "I wanted to provide for his future," I said simply. It seemed like a sensible use of some of my lottery winnings. "This isn't about being sensible," Rachel countered, her voice rising. "This is about control. You're trying to buy his affection, make me look like the bad parent who only cares about money." Several staff members and residents had paused to watch our confrontation. I gestured toward my office again. "Please, Rachel, let's not do this here." This time she followed, though her body language remained hostile as she took a seat across from my desk. "I'm sorry the trust fund upset you," I began once the door was closed. "That wasn't my intention." "What exactly was your intention then?" she demanded. "Because from where I sit, you've been systematically undermining me since you won that money. Buying this place, proving you don't need my help, showing everyone what a wonderful, generous person you are while making me look like the villain." The accusation stung, but there was a kernel of truth in it that I couldn't ignore. Part of me had wanted to prove Rachel wrong, to show her and everyone else that I was still capable, still valuable. Perhaps there had been some element of vindication in my actions. "You're right," I said quietly. "I was hurt and angry after you put me here. When I had the means to change my situation, I did it in a way that, yes, probably felt like a rebuke to you." She seemed startled by my admission. "But, Rachel," I continued, "this isn't just about you and me anymore. Look at what's happening here." I gestured toward the window, where residents could be seen in the garden, engaged in conversation and activity. People who were merely existing are living again. Staff who were burning out are finding joy in their work. What began as my personal rebellion has become something meaningful for dozens of people. Rachel's expression softened slightly. "I never meant to warehouse you," she said, the fight draining from her voice. "After your stroke, I was terrified. Dad was gone, Michael was too far away to help, and suddenly you, the strongest person I knew, couldn't even walk without assistance. So you took control," I finished for her. "I thought I was protecting you." She looked down at her hands. "But maybe I was protecting myself too, from having to watch you struggle, from having to face the possibility of losing you. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. The wall between us hadn't fallen, but cracks were forming, letting light through. I should have fought harder, I acknowledged. I let grief and shock make me passive. By the time I was thinking clearly again, it felt too late. You had already decided what my life would be. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. And now you've decided, she said finally, but without the earlier accusation in her tone. I've reclaimed my right to decide, I corrected gently. There's a difference. She nodded slowly, then picked up the trust fund paperwork from where she'd set it on my desk. Theo was excited about this, you know, she admitted. When I explained what it was, he said it meant you believed in him. I smiled at that. I do. Very much. I haven't been fair to either of you, Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. Keeping him away from you for so long. That was wrong of me. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. The closest we had come to reconciliation since this all began. We can't change the past, I said, reaching across the desk to touch her hand briefly. But we can choose a different path. Forward. Rachel met my eyes, really met them. For the first time in longer than I could remember. I'd like to try, she said. The moment stretched between us, fragile but real. A truth finally spoken. A possibility of healing neither of us had dared to hope for just months before. Outside my window, the maple tree's leaves had turned golden, in the autumn light, preparing for their inevitable release. There was wisdom in that, I thought. Knowing when to hold on and when to let go, trusting that spring would come again in its time. The tentative truce with Rachel was a beginning, not an ending. There were still uncomfortable silences, moments of tension, old wounds that flared unexpectedly. But we were trying, both of us, in our imperfect ways. She began bringing Theo for weekly visits, sometimes staying for an hour or two herself, helping in the garden or simply sitting with me in the community room, watching the life that flowed around us. It wasn't the relationship we'd had before my stroke, and perhaps it never would be, but it was honest in a way we hadn't been with each other in years. With this fragile family reconciliation underway, I found myself more able to focus on the broader community I was building at Willow Creek. The renovations were complete now, transforming the formerly sterile facility into a place that felt genuinely home-like. Residents, community members, as we now consistently called them, had painted their own doors in colors of their choosing. Art lined the hallways, much of it created by the residents themselves in classes led by local artists, who volunteered their time. More significant than the physical changes was the shift in how decisions were made. We had established a community council with elected representatives from both residents and staff, ensuring that those most affected by policies had a voice in creating them. It wasn't always efficient, but it was democratic and dignified. You've created something remarkable here, Michael said during his first visit from Arizona. My son had finally made the trip after hearing about both my lottery win and Rachel's guardianship attempt, concerned and curious in equal measure. We were sitting in the new sunroom, a bright space filled with plants and comfortable furniture. That had previously been an underutilized physical therapy area. It wasn't just me, I replied, watching as Sophia played piano while several residents sang along, their voices wavering but joyful. Everyone here contributed once they were given the chance. Michael shook his head in wonder. I still can't believe you won the lottery and bought the nursing home. It sounds like something from a movie. I laughed. Life is stranger than fiction sometimes. He grew serious then. I should have been here. When Rachel moved you, when all this was happening, I should have been more involved. You had your own challenges, I reminded him gently. His wife's multiple sclerosis had progressively worsened over the past few years, requiring increasingly intensive care. You were taking care of Janet. I understood. Still, he insisted, I could have done more. Video calls at least. Better. Questions when we did talk. I patted his hand. We all have regrets, Michael. What matters is what we do now. Later that evening, Michael joined me for the community council meeting, observing quietly as we discussed everything from menu rotations to a proposed partnership with a local music school for regular performances. Afterward, as residents and staff dispersed, he lingered, looking thoughtful. Mom, he said finally, I've been thinking about something. Janet and we've been struggling with her care. The options in Phoenix aren't great, and her condition is getting more challenging. I waited, sensing where this was heading. Would there be space for us here? He asked hesitantly. Not just for her, but for me too? I know you don't typically have younger residents, but with her medical needs. The request caught me by surprise, not because it was unwelcome, but because it represented such a profound shift in our family dynamic. My son, who had built his life 1,000 miles away, was asking to come home, not out of obligation or guilt, but because he recognized the value of what we had created at Willow Creek. We'd need to make some adaptations, I said, thinking aloud. One of the administrative apartments might work, with modifications for Janet's mobility needs, and we'd want to ensure we have the right medical support on staff for her specific condition. Michael's face lit up. So it's possible? More than possible, I assured him. It would be wonderful to have you both here. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity as we prepared for Michael and Janet's arrival. Contractors returned to convert a rarely used office suite into an accessible apartment. Dr. Winters, our medical director, consulted with Janet's neurologist to ensure continuity of care. The Community Council held a special session to discuss integrating younger residents with medical needs, setting an important precedent for Willow Creek's future. Through it all, I found myself surrounded by a network of support I had never expected to have again after Edward died. Makina checked in daily, making sure I wasn't overtaxing myself. Walter offered practical suggestions for the apartment renovation, drawing on his engineering expertise. Dorothy kept me laughing with her dry observations about life and family relationships. Even Rachel became more involved, helping to prepare for her brother's return. She and Michael had always been close despite the distance between them, and the prospect of his moving back seemed to awaken something in her, a remembrance of our family as it had been perhaps, or a glimpse of what it might become again. It's strange, she said one afternoon as we sorted through boxes of family photographs to decorate Michael's new apartment. A year ago, I thought I was watching you diminish, fade away. Now you're at the center of this whole community, bringing us all back together. I considered this as I held a faded photograph of all four of us, Edward, myself, Michael, and Rachel, standing in front of the bakery on its opening day. Edward's arm was around my waist, his expression proud. The children were young, gap-toothed, and gangly. I was never really fading, I said finally, just waiting for the right conditions to bloom again. Rachel's eyes softened. Like your roses at the old house. Exactly like that. I nodded, touched that she remembered. On the day Michael and Janet arrived, the main entrance of Willow Creek was decorated with welcome signs created by residents in the art program. Sophia played cheerful music on the piano, while staff and community members gathered to greet them. Janet looked tired from the journey, but smiled genuinely as I embraced her. Despite her physical limitations, her mind remained sharp, her sense of humor intact. Eleanor, she said warmly, you've outdone yourself. Michael said you'd transformed this place, but I had no idea. Wait until you see your apartment, I told her. Walter's added some special features he thought might help with your mobility. Michael stood slightly apart, taking in the scene with visible emotion. Rachel approached him hesitantly, then pulled him into a tight hug. "Welcome home," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. As I watched my children reconnect, surrounded by the community that had become my extended family, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't experienced since before my stroke. This wasn't the life I had planned. It was both more challenging and more rewarding than anything I could have imagined. In finding authentic support, both giving and receiving it, I had discovered not just survival, but renewal. As Willow Creek's evolution continued and my family slowly healed, I began to think more broadly about the impact we could have beyond our walls. The local media coverage had brought attention to our approach, generating inquiries from families, healthcare professionals, and even legislators interested in elder care reform. "You've created a model here," Mrs. Chen observed during one of our regular meetings. "People want to know how to replicate it." I considered this as I reviewed our latest financial statements. Willow Creek was operating at capacity, with a waiting list that grew longer each month. We were financially stable thanks to a combination of my lottery investment and careful management, but not wildly profitable, by design. We prioritized quality care and fair compensation over maximizing returns. "What are you thinking, Eleanor?" Mrs. Chen asked, noticing my contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about legacy," I replied, "about making sure what we've built here outlasts me." The next day, I called a meeting with our leadership team, McKenna, Walter, Pauline, and Dr. Winters. Over coffee in the sunroom, I shared my emerging vision. "I want to establish a foundation," I explained. "One that can help other care facilities implement the changes we've made here. Not just the physical renovations, but the philosophical shift, treating elders as community members rather than patients." McKenna nodded enthusiastically. "The Fitzgerald Foundation for Dignified Aging?" "Something like that," I smiled. "Using the remainder of my lottery winnings as seed funding, with grants available to facilities willing to commit to our core principles." Over the following weeks, we developed a strategic plan. The foundation would offer 3 tiers of support: consultation services where our staff would share best practices, grant funding for facilities ready to implement changes, and advocacy work targeting the policies and regulations that often hindered innovation in elder care. "You're creating a movement," Michael observed one evening as I showed him the draft proposal. "Not just fixing your own situation, but changing the system." "It's ambitious," I acknowledged. "Maybe too ambitious." "Mom," he said seriously, "you won the lottery and bought the nursing home that was mistreating you. Too ambitious isn't in your vocabulary anymore." I laughed at that. He was right, of course. Something in me had fundamentally shifted when I'd discovered the winning ticket. Not just because of the money, but because of the realization that I still had choices, that my story wasn't finished. Rachel, to my surprise, offered to help with the foundation's legal structure, connecting us with her law firm's nonprofit, Specialist. It was the most tangible sign yet of her commitment to reconciliation, a professional endorsement of what I was building. "I know some people who might be interested in contributing," she told me. "Colleagues who've had parents in traditional nursing homes. They've seen the problems firsthand." We launched the Fitzgerald Foundation for Dignified Aging with a small ceremony in Willow Creek's Garden Court. Local officials attended, along with representatives from several care facilities interested in our model. Theo proudly handed out program booklets he had helped design. Standing at the podium, looking out at the gathered community, my family, the residents who had become friends, the staff who had embraced our vision, I felt a profound sense of purpose. What had begun as my personal reclamation had expanded into something greater, a strategic response not just to my own circumstances, but to a system that diminished too many elders. "This foundation," I told the audience, "represents our belief that aging should never mean losing your voice, your choices, or your dignity. What we've created here at Willow Creek isn't luxury. It's simply what everyone deserves in their later years. And with your help, we're going to make it the new standard." The applause that followed wasn't just for me, but for the possibility of transformation. For all of us who had once been discarded, finding ourselves, against all odds, at the forefront of change. 6 months after the Foundation's launch, I received an unexpected call from Mr. Reynolds, the former administrator I had dismissed when taking over Willow Creek. "Mrs. Fitzgerald," he said, his voice tense but controlled. "I'd like to meet with you. There are some matters we should discuss." I agreed to see him the following day, curious about what could prompt this contact after all this time. Mrs. Chen insisted on attending the meeting with me, concerned about potential legal issues. Reynolds arrived precisely on time, dressed formally, as if for a job interview. He declined coffee and sat stiffly in my office, a folder of documents clutched in his hands. "I'll be direct," he began. "I'm now working with Evergreen Senior Living, the company that previously owned Willow Creek. They're concerned about the, let's call it, negative publicity generated by the contrast between their management and yours." Mrs. Chen leaned forward. "Are you suggesting Evergreen has some complaint about Mrs. Fitzgerald's operation of this facility?" "Not a complaint, exactly," Reynolds clarified. "More of a request. They'd prefer that public statements about Willow Creek's transformation not explicitly reference the previous conditions. It reflects poorly on their other properties." I regarded him calmly. "You want me to stop telling the truth about how residents were treated here?" "I want you to be more diplomatic," he countered. "The Foundation's advocacy work is creating complications for legitimate businesses in the senior care industry." "Legitimate businesses," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air between us. "Mr. Reynolds, when I arrived at Willow Creek, residents were being served food I wouldn't give to a pet. Medications were administered with minimal monitoring. People spent hours alone in rooms with no meaningful engagement. If that's legitimate business, then yes, we are creating complications." His jaw tightened. "That's exactly the kind of inflammatory language I'm talking about. Evergreen is prepared to pursue legal action for defamation if necessary." Mrs. Chen smiled thinly. "Any defamation case would involve discovery, Mr. Reynolds. Are you confident that a detailed examination of Evergreen's practices would favor your clients?" Reynolds hesitated, clearly unprepared for this response. "I don't want an adversarial relationship with Evergreen," I said, softening my tone slightly. "In fact, I'd welcome their participation in our Foundation's programs. We offer consultation, services, grants for facility improvements." "That's not why I'm here," he interrupted. "I'm here to protect Evergreen's reputation." I stood, signaling the meeting's end. "The best way to protect a reputation is to earn a better one. Please tell your employers they're welcome to visit Willow Creek anytime. They can see firsthand what dignified elder care looks like, and we'd be happy to help them implement similar standards in their facilities." Reynolds rose, his expression a mixture of frustration and reluctant respect. "You've changed, Mrs. Fitzgerald." "No, Mr. Reynolds," I replied. "I've simply remembered who I always was." After he left, Mrs. Chen looked at me with admiration. "You handled that perfectly, offered collaboration instead of conflict, but didn't back down on the principles." I sighed, feeling the weight of the confrontation. It won't be the last resistance we face. The Foundation is challenging profitable business models. People don't give up profits easily. "No," she agreed, "but they do respond to public pressure, and stories like yours are powerful." The encounter with Reynolds clarified something important. Our work wasn't just about improving individual facilities. It was about changing the narrative around aging itself, challenging the assumption that elders could be warehoused, forgotten, treated as problems rather than people with continuing value and rights. That evening, I shared the details of Reynolds' visit with Michael, Janet, and Rachel, who had come for our weekly family dinner in my apartment. "So basically, he tried to intimidate you into silence," Rachel summarized, indignant on my behalf. "After everything they put you through." "It was a tactical move," I said. Evergreen sees our foundation as a threat. That means we're having an impact. Michael raised his glass. To impact, he toasted. And to standing your ground. As we clinked glasses, I felt a profound sense of resolution. I had confronted not just Reynolds and what he represented, but my own past acquiescence. I had reclaimed my voice, my agency, my right to demand better, not just for myself, but for all those who couldn't advocate for themselves. The path forward wouldn't be without obstacles. There would be more confrontations, more resistance from those invested in the status quo. But I was no longer alone in the fight. I had found my strength, my purpose, and my community. And that made all the difference. 1 year after purchasing Willow Creek, I stood in the garden court surrounded by blooming roses, listening to Sophia play a Chopin nocturne on the piano we'd moved outdoors for our anniversary celebration. Residents and staff mingled freely, sharing stories and laughter beneath strands of fairy lights that glowed softly in the early evening. This moment, this gathering of people who had become family, represented everything I had hoped to create when I first signed those purchase papers. Not just a better facility, but a genuine community where elders thrived rather than merely existed. "Penny for your thoughts," Walter said, joining me near the rose trellis. At 84, he remained sharp as ever, his engineering mind now focused on our newest project, designing accessible garden spaces for care facilities with limited outdoor areas. "Just marveling at how much has changed in a year," I replied. "Remember what this space looked like before? Concrete and a few plastic chairs." He nodded. "Hard to believe. Even harder to believe I'm now employed again at my age. Consulting with the foundation keeps me busier than I was before retirement. The Fitzgerald Foundation had grown beyond our initial expectations. We were currently working with 7 facilities across the state, providing grants and consultation for improvements ranging from staff restructuring to physical renovations. Our advocacy work had garnered attention at the state legislature, where a committee was now examining regulatory reforms for elder care. "Grandma!" Theo called, hurrying over with a plate of cookies. "Dorothy said to tell you these are almost as good as yours, but not quite." I laughed, taking one of the maple pecan cookies that had become a regular feature at Willow Creek events. Dorothy had adapted my recipe for the kitchen staff, insisting they maintain my standards. "High praise from Dorothy," I told him. "She's not easily impressed." Rachel appeared behind her son, her expression more relaxed than I could remember seeing it in years. She had recently reduced her work hours to spend more time with Theo and to help with the foundation's legal matters. "The newspaper reporter is here," she informed me. "She'd like some photos of you with the residents for the feature story." The local paper was doing a spread on Willow Creek's transformation and the foundation's work, positive publicity that would help advance our mission of changing elder care standards throughout the region. As I moved through the gathering, posing for photos and sharing our story with the reporter, I caught glimpses of the life I had created from what once seemed like the end of independence. Michael helping Janet navigate the garden paths in her wheelchair, both of them looking more at peace than they had in Phoenix. Makina explaining our medication management system to visitors from another facility. Dorothy holding court with new residents, her sharp wit making them feel welcome in their own inimitable way. Later, as the celebration continued and twilight deepened, I slipped away briefly to my apartment. On my dresser sat a small vase containing a dried rose, not from Edward's garden at our old home, but from the first bush we'd planted here at Willow Creek. Next to it stood a framed lottery ticket, the numbers that had changed everything preserved, behind glass. I touched both gently, acknowledging the strange path that had led me here. The stroke that had seemed like an ending. The nursing home placement that had felt like abandonment. The lucky numbers that had given me the means to rewrite the story. But it wasn't just luck, I realized. It was also courage. The courage to imagine something better, to demand more than what I'd been given, to build instead of merely accepting. My new life wasn't perfect. I still had physical limitations from the stroke. There were still difficult days with Rachel, moments when old wounds resurfaced. The foundation's work faced ongoing challenges from industry resistance and regulatory hurdles. Yet, imperfect as it was, this life held meaning, purpose, and genuine connection. Things I had feared were behind me when I first arrived at Willow Creek 18 months ago. Outside, Sophia began playing "What a Wonderful World," a request I'd made earlier. I returned to the garden, to my community, to the celebration of what we had created together, from discarded to essential, from patient to leader, from isolated to connected. This was my new life, not a diminished version of what came before, but something different, something rich with possibility and purpose for however many years remained. 2 years to the day after I received my lottery winnings, I sat on a bench in Willow Creek's Memorial Garden, a peaceful space created to honor residents who had passed. Dorothy's name was freshly engraved on a stone plaque beside a vibrant hydrangea bush, her favorite. We had said goodbye to her just last week, a gentle passing in her sleep at 91. I told them no crying at my memorial, she had instructed me months earlier, when her health began to decline. Just plant something colorful and have a good gossip session in my honor. We had done exactly that, gathering to share stories of her sharp wit and unwavering friendship. Not a farewell of despair, but a celebration of a life fully lived until its natural conclusion. The garden was quiet now in the late afternoon light. From somewhere in the main building, I could hear piano, music, Sophia teaching one of our newest residents to play a simple melody. Life continuing as it should. "There you are," Rachel said, approaching with 2 cups of tea. She handed me one and settled beside me on the bench. "Michael said you might be out here." I accepted the tea gratefully. "Just thinking about Dorothy. And everything else." Rachel nodded, understanding in her eyes that wouldn't have been there 2 years ago. Our relationship had found a new equilibrium. Not the easy closeness of her childhood, but something more nuanced, built on hard-earned, mutual respect. "The foundation received another grant application this morning," she said after a comfortable silence. "A facility up north. They're interested in implementing our community council model." I smiled. "Our ideas are spreading." "Your ideas," she corrected gently. "No," I insisted. "Ours. All of us here at Willow Creek. I may have provided the means, but the vision evolved through everyone's contributions." We sat quietly, watching a pair of cardinals flit between the garden bushes. Rachel had recently joined the foundation's board of directors, bringing her legal expertise and, more importantly, her first-hand understanding of family dynamics and elder care decisions. "I've been thinking about the house," she said suddenly. "The Victorian. My old home." According to neighborhood gossip Michael had picked up, the young couple who purchased it were already planning to sell, their renovation over budget, their dream house proving more challenging than anticipated. "What about it?" I asked carefully. "Maybe." "The foundation should buy it," Rachel suggested. "Convert it into a small group home, a pilot project for our aging-in-place model." I turned to look at her, surprised and touched by the suggestion. "You'd be comfortable with that?" She met my eyes directly. "I think it would be fitting, bringing things full circle." And there it was. An acknowledgement of the past, an offering for the future. Not quite an apology, but a recognition of how far we had come. I reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. "I'll bring it up at the next board meeting." As sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, I felt a profound sense of peace. Life had taken unexpected turns, some painful, some miraculous, but had ultimately delivered me to this moment of balance. Not perfect happiness, but something deeper. The contentment of purpose fulfilled, relationships mended, and a legacy that would continue beyond my time. From the nursing home resident whose life decisions had been taken away, to the architect of a movement for dignified aging, my story had found its equilibrium, and it wasn't over yet. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.